Breaking news from London, Prince Harry was seen arriving at Clarence House today for a meeting with his father, King Charles. It's their first reunion in more than a year and a half. The two have been estranged since Harry and his wife, Meghan, left royal life, moving to California in 2020.
After being away from the palace for years, Prince Harry was spotted meeting his father, King Charles, in secret. His visit not only shocked everyone, but also confirmed that the king had other plans for his estranged son. The reason why they had to meet in secret will shock you. The heavy iron gates of Clarence House opened without warning just after dawn, and within minutes, royal protection officers were scrambling behind closed doors. London was barely awake, and the crowd of tourists had not yet gathered outside the palace gates with their cameras and flags. The city was silent, but inside the walls of the royal residence, a quiet crisis was already unfolding. Prince Harry had suddenly returned to Britain. He came unexpectedly, without the company of his wife Meghan Markle, and without a single word of explanation to the public, the government, or the royal press corps. For years, the movements of the Duke of Sussex had been a matter of intense international coordination. Every visit to the UK was solely for the purpose of meeting his court appointments. But on this cold morning, all of that established protocol was thrown directly into the trash. There were no flashing police lights, no official motorcades, and no pack of reporters waiting to capture his arrival. He simply appeared at the rear security gates in a heavily tinted, unmarked SUV, catching the royal guards completely by surprise. That was not the most shocking part. The same walls that had witnessed decades of discreet decisions now held a moment no one inside the room could have predicted. King Charles, seated at a familiar mahogany desk once occupied by his mother, was not preparing for ceremony or public duty. He was reviewing paperwork, documents tied to the estate of Queen Elizabeth II, who had passed away in September 2022. It was meant to be a formality, the kind of task monarchs complete behind closed doors, far from headlines. The meeting brought together a small, trusted circle: senior legal counsel, the keeper of the privy purse, and advisors who had served both mother and son. Leather folders were opened, seals checked, and pages turned with professional calm. Most of what lay inside matched long-settled expectations: private estates, heirlooms, and assets already distributed years earlier. Balmoral, Sandringham, treasured jewelry. Nothing unusual, nothing unsettling, until one envelope appeared. It was thinner than the rest, marked by a date that immediately caught attention: March 2022. Only months before the Queen's death. Inside was a handwritten document, unmistakably Elizabeth's. The script was steadier than expected for her final year. Slightly uneven, yes, but intentional. This was not a draft. This was a decision. As Charles read, the room grew still. His face, so often trained into composure, shifted slowly. What lay before him did not concern property alone. It addressed Prince Harry, not in passing, not vaguely, but directly, with precision that left no room for misreading. The clause outlined an inheritance arrangement that ran against every assumption Charles had carried since his mother's passing. It was not simply about money or land. It was conditional, carefully structured, and tied to future choices. It suggested that Elizabeth, even while ill, had been thinking far ahead, about division within her family, about time, and about consequences. The advisors waited as Charles reread the document. Once, twice, 3 times. Each reading carried more weight than the last. Legal counsel quietly confirmed what the king already suspected. The clause was authentic, properly witnessed, and fully enforceable. It had been sealed with instructions to remain undisclosed until the appropriate moment. That moment had clearly arrived. Thoughts drifted to Windsor Castle, to a private study where Elizabeth might have sat alone, pen in hand, knowing exactly what she was doing. She had ruled through wars, political storms, and family turmoil. She understood silence as a tool. This clause was not an accident or an oversight. It was strategy. What made the discovery heavier was not its legality, but its intent. The Queen had left her eldest son more than a crown. She had left him a decision that touched an open wound. Harry's departure from royal life had fractured trust and reshaped relationships. This clause reopened that chapter, not emotionally, but formally. A quiet question finally surfaced from one advisor. How should they proceed? Should preparations begin? Should other parties be informed? Charles did not answer immediately. He removed his glasses and rested them on the desk, rubbing the bridge of his nose. For a brief moment, he was not the king. He was a son, realizing that his mother had planned this reckoning long before he was ready to face it. The ticking of a mantel clock filled the silence. Outside, London moved on. Traffic, voices, ordinary life. Unaware that within palace walls, a choice was forming that could reshape the future of the House of Windsor. Elizabeth had always believed in timing. By placing this clause where she did, she ensured that Charles would face it as king, not as heir. The crown, already heavy, felt heavier still. Whatever decision followed would echo far beyond that room. The clause was no longer hidden, and neither were the consequences. And when Queen Elizabeth's secret clause was revealed, what unexpected consequences began to ripple through the palace, changing everything insiders thought they knew. Let's go back to that November evening. The palace was deathly still. Staff moved in hushed, measured steps through marble corridors. Advisors sat rigid in mahogany-paneled rooms, their eyes fixed on documents that hadn't yet been made public. King Charles III, seated in his private study beneath the weight of centuries of monarchy, pressed his pen to paper. The royal decree was short, cold, almost surgical. Just 25 words that officially stripped Prince Harry of every remaining privilege, honor, and royal connection still attached to his name. No fanfare, no emotional statement, no fatherly warmth, just ink on royal parchment, and the quiet, irreversible end of an era. The palace went silent, and then the world exploded. Within minutes, headlines lit up every screen on the planet. Hashtags flooded social media. Debates erupted across living rooms, newsrooms, and comment sections in every time zone. Was this justified? Was this vindictive? Was this the act of a king protecting his crown, or a father punishing his child in front of the world? People picked sides immediately, and fiercely. But here is what almost nobody was asking in the chaos of that first night. What was Harry going to do next? That question, quiet, almost invisible beneath the noise, was the one that would change everything. In the hours after the king's announcement, the Sussex camp released a two-line statement through the Archewell Foundation. It said the Duke and Duchess of Sussex remained committed to their humanitarian work. That was it. No outrage, no accusations, no press conference, just silence wrapped in 12 careful words. And that silence, controlled, deliberate, impossibly restrained, told the real story. Because those who know Meghan Markle know she does not do silence by accident. Every word she releases, every image she puts into the world, is calculated with precision. So when she chose stillness, the palace noticed. Behind the scenes in Montecito, however, it was anything but still. Sources close to the couple described the atmosphere as electric with tension. Meghan was furious, genuinely, deeply furious. Not because she had lost a title, but because of what the stripping of that title implied. That she had exploited Harry, that she had used him, that she had turned his royal identity into a ladder for her own ambitions. To Meghan, those were not just royal housekeeping decisions. They were character assassinations dressed up in constitutional language. Her legal team was already moving. Crisis PR firms were being briefed. Plans were being drawn up for the counteroffensive that palace insiders had feared most. A full-scale media battle fought across every platform Meghan could command. And then something happened that nobody expected. Harry asked for a pause. According to multiple sources close to the situation, it was Harry, not Meghan, not a lawyer, not a press strategist, who made the call that slowed everything down. He reportedly reached out through a trusted intermediary with a message that left even his closest confidants stunned. He wanted to talk, not to the press, not to a documentary crew, not through a podcast or a memoir. He wanted to talk to his father. Now, stop and think about what that means. This is a man who had publicly accused the palace of racism, who had detailed physical altercations with his own brother in a tell-all memoir, who had sat beside Meghan on a globally broadcast interview and implied that the institution he grew up in had failed him in the most fundamental ways. This is a man who, just weeks before, had appeared in Canada still carrying the styling of Royal Highness, an act the palace considered a near-constitutional provocation. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of being formally, publicly, and permanently stripped of everything royal, his first instinct was not to fight back through the media. It was to reach out to his father. That single detail reframes everything that came after, because this was not a man plotting a PR comeback. This was a son, stripped of everything, standing at the edge of something he hadn't fully understood until the moment it was taken. Here's the question we want you to sit with. If you had lost everything that defined you, everything you had grown up being, would your first call be to a lawyer or to your family? Drop your answer in the comments. Because Harry's answer tells you something profound about where this story was really heading.
A discovery emerged that could send shockwaves through the royal family and alter its dynamics in ways no one could have foreseen. What began as a routine review of estate documents became, for King Charles, a moment charged with both legal significance and deeply personal weight. Among the familiar papers outlining properties, heirlooms, and the careful distribution of wealth, one particular document stood apart, a sealed clause written in Queen Elizabeth's own hand, crafted during her final months. At first glance, it appeared as part of the estate's ordinary formalities, the kind of document Charles had seen countless times in his decades of royal life. But as he broke the seal and read the delicate, deliberate script, he realized this was no ordinary note of instruction. These were the Queen's final words, carefully concealed and intended for discovery at the precise moment when they could have the greatest impact. The clause addressed Prince Harry's inheritance, but not in the straightforward manner Charles might have expected. There was a structure, conditions, and intent that suggested a larger purpose than mere financial provision. The words on the page carried with them a mother's careful strategy, a blend of love, concern, and foresight designed to guide the family even after her passing. They were meant to shape the path forward, to encourage communication, reconciliation, and the preservation of bonds that had frayed over time. Charles understood immediately that this was more than a legal matter. It was a personal intervention, a final act by a mother who had spent decades navigating both family and monarchy with unwavering attention, now extending her influence beyond the grave. The clause itself was intricate. It laid out a clear inheritance for Harry, yet it was accompanied by stipulations that required thought, negotiation, and cooperation. This was not about wealth alone, but about connection and responsibility, a framework through which the late Queen sought to ensure that her grandson remained meaningfully linked to his heritage, to the family, and to the monarchy she had devoted her life to serving. Each word had been chosen with precision, balancing pragmatism and emotion, practicality and hope. Charles paused, reflecting on the subtle power of his mother's foresight. Elizabeth had always understood the delicate intersections of duty, affection, and consequence. Through this clause, She was extending a hand to Harry, offering an opportunity to reconnect, to bridge a divide that had lingered for years. At the same time, she placed a silent challenge before her eldest son to navigate the responsibilities of kingship alongside the equally weighty duties of fatherhood and family unity. What unfolded in that quiet moment was both a revelation and a reckoning. The discovery of the hidden clause was a reminder that even in death, Queen Elizabeth had not relinquished her influence. She had left a carefully constructed path, one that could reshape relationships, challenge old resentments, and potentially bring fractured bonds back into alignment. King Charles uncovered a sealed clause in his mother's will, and what he found inside was nothing short of shocking. But what exactly did the Queen leave behind? And why would she include such a surprising clause? Now, let's uncover a grandmother's final gift.
Behind the calm dignity of Queen Elizabeth II's final days lay a decision few inside the palace expected, one quietly written in her own hand and sealed into her will. It was not dramatic in tone, yet it carried weight far beyond numbers and legal language. When the document surfaced after her death in September 2022, it revealed that the late monarch had left Prince Harry a significant inheritance, about £20 million from her private estate, but in a form that spoke less about wealth and more about belonging. This was never meant to be a simple transfer of money. The Queen had shaped the clause with deliberate care, aware of the fractures already visible within her family and the uncertain road ahead for the monarchy. Access to the full inheritance depended on Harry maintaining a living, active connection to the United Kingdom and the wider Commonwealth. Her words required him to spend at least 90 days each year on British soil or in Commonwealth nations, involved in charitable or community-focused work. It was not a demand to return to royal duties, but a reminder that distance did not have to mean disappearance. What stood out was the balance she tried to strike. Elizabeth II understood Harry's wish for independence, yet she also believed that roots matter. For over 70 years, she had served a global family of nations, and she was unwilling to see her own grandson drift entirely beyond that shared world. The condition was framed not as punishment, but as a pathway, one that allowed freedom while still preserving ties to history, service, and place. Her concern extended beyond Harry alone. Another portion of the will set aside roughly £5 million for Archie and Lilibet, intended for their education and upbringing. These funds were to be overseen by trustees approved jointly by Harry and the reigning monarch, ensuring a degree of continuity between generations. More importantly, the Queen expressed a clear hope that her great-grandchildren would spend meaningful time in Britain as they grew. She wrote that they should never feel like strangers to the land and family from which they came. Attached to the legal papers was a private letter addressed to Charles, written in Elizabeth's unmistakable voice. In it, she did not deny the pain that had built up within the family, the anger, the disappointment, the sense of loss. Yet, she reminded her son of something simpler and deeper. Harry was still her grandson. His children were still her great-grandchildren. And she could not leave the world without trying one last time to keep them from being lost to the family entirely. The letter did not issue commands. Instead, it carried the quiet hope of a mother nearing the end of her life. She spoke of bridges that had been burned, but not beyond repair, if both sides were willing to rebuild. The inheritance clause, she explained, was her contribution to that effort. What Charles and Harry chose to do with it would be their decision, but she wanted them to have the means, practical and emotional, to try. Royal legal advisors later confirmed that the clause was airtight. The Queen had consulted trusted experts, ensuring that every sentence reflected her intentions clearly and could not be easily challenged. This was not symbolic language or a suggestion open to interpretation. It was firm, thoughtful, and deeply personal. The sum involved was large, but carefully chosen. Elizabeth knew that too much money could create resentment or fuel claims of favoritism. £20 million was enough to provide stability and opportunity, but not so much that it would distract from the true purpose of the provision. This was never about buying loyalty. It was about connection, about family threads she refused to let snap completely. As Charles read the document, he could almost hear his mother's voice within it, steady, practical, yet filled with quiet emotion. She had known her time was short. She had known that the responsibility of healing the rift with Harry would fall to him. And so she left behind this final gesture, part tool, part burden, and part plea. Even in death, Queen Elizabeth II was still trying to hold her family together. So what private burdens was Queen Elizabeth carrying while striving to hold her family together? The weight of a name. Here's something the tabloids rarely slow down long enough to say out loud. The title Prince Harry was not just a string of words on an official document. It was not just access to palace events or diplomatic priority or the right to a particular form of address. That title was Harry's identity. From the moment he was born, it was the lens through which the entire world saw him. It was the armor he wore into every room. It was the invisible scaffolding that held his sense of self together, even as everything around him crumbled. And when King Charles signed it away, when that scaffold was pulled out from beneath him, Harry was left facing something no amount of Montecito sunshine could fix: the terrifying question of who he actually was. Because here is the brutal truth that palace insiders have whispered for years. Harry had never truly built an identity outside the crown. His military service, decorated, genuine, and deeply meaningful to him, had always been filtered through his royal context. The Invictus Games, perhaps the most authentically Harry thing he had ever created, had always been introduced as the brainchild of a prince. Even his activism, his mental health advocacy, his public speaking, all of it carried the invisible weight of royal authority. Without the title, what remained? A man, flawed, fiercely human, and suddenly, terrifyingly visible. Friends who spoke to Harry in the weeks following the decree described someone who was not angry in the way they expected. He was not plotting. He was not raging at the palace. He was quiet, reflective, and, by multiple accounts, deeply shaken by one specific realization. He missed his father. Not the king, not the institution. His father. This is the part of the story where the narrative gets genuinely complicated. And if you have been paying attention to the Sussex saga over the years, you know that complicated is where the real truth lives. Meghan Markle is, by every credible account, a brilliant strategist. She understands media, narrative, and public perception at a level that most professional communications experts would envy. She had already identified a path forward. A 2026 media relaunch designed to reposition her entirely outside the royal framework, to build a new personal brand powerful enough to stand on its own without the Duchess title as its foundation. It was smart, it was calculated, and it might have worked. But it required one thing: unanimous momentum. Both Harry and Meghan moving in the same direction with the same message at the same speed. And Harry, for the first time in years, was not sure he was ready to move at all. Sources suggest that in the weeks following King Charles's decree, quiet disagreements began to surface between the couple. Not dramatic fractures, not the kind of eruption that makes tabloid front pages. Private, careful disagreements about what to do next, and more critically, about what they actually wanted. Meghan wanted forward momentum, a new chapter, a definitive break from the royal story. Harry wanted something older, something he hadn't allowed himself to want in a very long time. He wanted to go home. The Queen's quiet safeguard. Few people ever saw Queen Elizabeth II as a woman driven by emotion. Yet beneath the calm routines of duty lived a grandmother who carried her family's joys and wounds in equal measure. Long before the public fallout, she had shared a unique warmth with Prince Harry. From his childhood at Windsor to his teenage years, he brought lightness into rooms heavy with tradition. His humor softened her, reminding her of a freer time before the crown demanded restraint above all else. That closeness made January 2020 especially painful. When Harry and Meghan announced their decision to step away from royal duties, the shock did not come from the choice itself, but from how abruptly it was delivered. The palace was forced to react, not prepare. For the Queen, it felt like being shut out of a conversation she believed should have begun with her. Still, those closest to her noticed that disappointment never erased concern. Her thoughts stayed fixed on Harry's safety, stability, and future. Public tension deepened in March 2021 after the Oprah interview aired from California. Accusations of racism, claims of neglect, and painful accounts of Meghan's mental health struggles struck at the heart of the monarchy. For Elizabeth, who had embodied the institution for decades, it felt deeply personal. Her response was brief and controlled, offering the careful phrase, "Recollections may vary." Privately, however, the situation weighed heavily. She was not only a queen managing a crisis, but a grandmother watching family ties stretch thin. What rarely reached headlines was that communication never fully ended. Quiet phone calls continued, scattered but meaningful. In those moments, she spoke less as a sovereign and more as family, making it clear that love did not depend on agreement. She disapproved of public conflict and regretted how disputes unfolded, yet the bond itself remained unbroken. As her health declined in late 2021, the Queen grew increasingly reflective. Years of service had taught her how to manage nations, transitions, and global change, but the rift within her own family felt unresolved. The approaching Platinum Jubilee in 2022, questions about Harry's attendance, and the reality of her mortality brought urgency. If reconciliation could not be achieved through conversation or ceremony, she would act in the one arena still firmly within her control. Working closely with a legal advisor she trusted deeply, someone who understood both law and family, Elizabeth crafted a discreet provision within her will. Its purpose went beyond money. Financial security for Harry mattered, but it was not the heart of the decision. She wanted his children to retain a living connection to Britain, to history, and to the family they were born into. Most importantly, she designed the clause in a way that required cooperation between Harry and Charles. It quietly insisted on dialogue, negotiation, and shared responsibility. Secrecy was essential. The Queen did not want this decision to dominate the immediate days after her death or interfere with the fragile beginnings of Charles's reign. By delaying its revelation until after a full estate review, she hoped emotions would cool and grief would soften resistance. Timing, she believed, could determine whether her final wish was rejected or respected. Attached to the clause was a personal letter revealing rare vulnerability. Elizabeth acknowledged regret, admitting she had waited too long to intervene more firmly. She wrote of trusting that time would heal wounds on its own, only to realize how deep the fractures had grown. By then, illness and protocol limited what she could do openly. The letter carried no blame, only reflection and resolve. Seen in this light, the hidden clause was not a political maneuver, but a final expression of faith. After 70 years on the throne, the Queen still believed that family bonds, when tested, should not be allowed to dissolve beyond repair. Even at the end, she refused to accept permanent separation as inevitable. Their relationships with Harry could blossom or remain distant, depending on how he engaged with the obligations set by their grandmother. The Queen's vision had always included healing these generational rifts, but implementation demanded the cooperation of multiple family members, not all of whom were inclined toward conciliation. Realistically, the outcome might be partial and imperfect. Harry could accept the inheritance but maintain emotional distance, fulfilling the technical requirements while keeping the warmth at arm's length. Relationships could become functional but cool, cordial but restrained. In this scenario, reconciliation would be real but incomplete, a compromise between estrangement and unity. The stakes were immense. A misstep could turn the inheritance into yet another battleground, with Harry publicly lamenting the conditions and the press portraying the monarchy as manipulative or Charles as overly controlling. Conversely, success could mark the first meaningful step toward mending fractured bonds, honoring the Queen's final wish for unity. For the first time in years, a framework existed, a map drawn by a grandmother's careful hand, pointing toward the possibility of family, of connection, of hope. Charles held both a burden and a gift. How he and Harry chose to navigate it would define their relationship, the well-being of the next generation, and the future of the monarchy itself. Across the vast distance between London and California, the royal family's fate now hung in balance, teetering between past pain and the fragile, tantalizing promise of reconciliation. So, what do you think King Charles will do after uncovering this shocking clause about Harry in the Queen's will? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and share.